god. How do people do this? Oh shit! Okay. We're not gonna do that again. Hello folks, welcome back to my channel. In my last video with like the jewelry and stuff I was wearing, I commented that I had like art teacher vibes, and I feel like there's something about this that like also is like art teacher vibes. Also, I have bangs now. Today I'm going to be doing my wrap up for all the books I read in the month of April. I read 17 books with 2 DNFs. That's a lot. My average for this year has been more like 7 to 8 books. I don't really know what happened. I mean, I think all except one of them I listened to at least partially on audio, so I know that's part of it. Is I had just a lot of projects at work where I was either driving for most of the day so I could listen to stuff in the car, or like a lot of Photoshop, so that's kind of like what happened. But also like my brain was ready to like get through stuff. Okay, so let's get started. Let's just start with getting my DNFs out of the way. So the first thing I DNF'd was Sea of Ruin by Pam Godwin. I am so sorry to Jen from the book Refuge, because I know this is like one of her favorite like historical pirate erotic romances. But like the writing style was not it for me. It was very modern. It's a first person narration, which I struggle with. Like it really depends on like how that first person narration, like how self-aware that narration is. And I just really did not like the voice of this character. I did not like how clunky the initial world building was. It was just I'm so sorry. It read like fan fiction. It was just like the author would have an idea and just kind of like throw it on to what was already happening. It was like, I was robbed by like the only pirate who I can't stand. By the way, we're married. By the way, he's the brother of my first mate, who, by the way, makes it very clear he would also like to sleep. Like, it was too much. Anyway, that's a bummer. I was totally excited for some sexy pirate things. And then later on, I DNF'd La Ciudad de las Bestias by Isabel Allende. I mostly was listening to this on audio, but occasionally tried to read it as well. I'm trying to read like at least 4 books a year in Spanish. I think the writing style in this is just a little advanced for me. Because Isabel Allende mostly writes adult fiction, I think her writing is a little bit advanced for my comprehension level in Spanish. And also, I got bored. I got about a little over halfway through the book, and I just could not care about what was happening. Because I owned a copy in English, I actually like switched over and tried to read a chapter in English to be like, okay, if I'm not having to deal with the language comprehension, can I get back into it? And I was just like, I don't care. So that was a bummer. I was kind of enjoying it initially. So this follows, I can't find my notes. So let me see what I can remember. It follows Alexander and a young girl named Nadia. They're like 13, 14, 15? I think maybe she's like 13 or 14 and he's 15. And his mother is sick with cancer, and it's just making his home life kind of hard. So he gets shipped off to spend time with his grandmother, who is a photographer or a reporter for National Geographic. And they embark on a journey to the Amazon. And there he meets Nadia, whose father is something, archaeologist, anthropologist, or something. But she's basically been raised in the Amazon rainforest, even though she is not indigenous to that region. And they embark on this journey that I kind of lost the thread of what's going on. I think it's partially they're with this doctor who is administering vaccinations to very remote tribes in the Amazon, and then there's like this hunter guide, typical exploitative white dude who basically like wants to figure out how to like turn this land into something that can make him money. He's very clearly a bad dude. I liked the treatment of like his very clearly sexist language and the way that like the female characters do not give a fucking inch to him. Like every time he talks to the doctor, he's like, I forget her name, Miss Smith, Dr. Smith. Every single time that somebody does not call the doctor by her honorific, she corrects them, and I appreciate the consistency. And I also appreciate that there's clearly a lot of research about the indigenous tribes in the Amazon. There's a lot, clearly like our bad guys talk about them being like super primitive. They don't even have weapons. They don't have riding, blah, blah, blah. But then like other characters will be like, well, actually they don't need weapons because like they are able to settle all of their conflicts without violence. They have a very high emotional maturity, like very much making the case of like, challenging what we think of as civilized. And like, well, just because like, of course they don't have the wheel because they live in dense jungle. The wheel would not be useful to them. There's no open area for them to use a wheel, so why would they have invented that? And very much challenging the concept of primitive, so I did like that. But the plot still had a little bit of like white savior vibes because we center these, non-native, non-indigenous kids who eventually kind of, they, have like totemic animals that they end up resonating with, and they are the ones who are like going to save these very remote tribes people from the exploitative other white men, and it just still felt weird that like the key to the survival of these untouched tribes was a couple of outsiders, and like Nadia speaks a little bit of some of like the native dialects because she's grown up there, but I don't know, it's like as far as like white savior plots go, it's miles better than a lot of them, but it just still was sitting a little bit weird for me, and it was making it hard for me to like be engaged with the story. Yeah. Anyway, like I think I'm bummed because it was so promising, but then I got so bored. So what I ended up doing is I'm gonna declutter my English copy. I have book 1 and 2 in the series. I'm gonna keep the Spanish copy just to kind of build up my repertoire of like books in Spanish that I can use for like fluency exercise. So I'm still like, making a little bit of space on my shelf because I'm getting rid of 2 books instead of 1. But yeah, enough. All right, so the next book I sort of finished. I listened to the audiobook of The Shock Doctrine by Naomi Klein, and I did not realize until well after I finished it that the audiobook is annotated. I was like, wow, this book is like this giant nonfiction with teeny tiny print is like only 9 hours? What the fuck? I don't know, maybe the narrator like talks really fast. No, it's annotated. I didn't realize that. I realized it a little bit when I was going back to make notes or like put in my tabs, and I realized like there was a whole section of the epilogue that they didn't talk about, and I went through and I read it, and I thought that they had just like rewritten the epilogue and cut out a bunch of stuff that like wasn't as up to date. and they just kept in the stuff that like was a more timeless conversation, but no, it was annotated. So that's a bummer. So I guess technically didn't read all of this. This is definitely something I'm going to revisit. Okay, so The Shock Doctrine, The Rise of Disaster Capitalism by Naomi Klein. So this talks about, I should keep this up for ease of editing reference and try not to blind you. So the Shock Doctrine refers to the like free market capitalist policies of corporations and to a point some political parties in the aftermath of crisis. Either they talk about like political coups in Latin America. Latin America was really like the predominant experimental grounds for this. This comes out of the Chicago School of Business. There was a particular professor who had this particular free like economic model, and that was about like removing government, moving towards privatization, of basically like not having the government run things, having private businesses run things. So, and that would be implemented in the aftermath of crisis, in the aftermath of disasters. So like political coup was like a big thing. They talk about doing it in Russia, or like post fall of the Soviet Union. That kind of happened in former Soviet states. It happened a lot in Iraq and during and after the Iraq War. Did I take notes of what else? And like the big one at the end that I wish they had gone into more, but I think it might have been like too recent in occurrence, was the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. And like, for example, things that happened after Hurricane Katrina was like a massive amount of public schools were closed. It's kind of hard to explain, seeing as like I read this beginning of the month and going back to it, but it's like, well, because a bunch of people were displaced and were no longer living in the city, now they didn't have the population to justify having all these schools, so they closed a bunch of them and then like transferred funding to a bunch of charter schools. So then these people, and all of this, and the big thing is like a bunch of this change happened while the residents were still displaced, so they were not physically present to be able to vote or like give any kind of public feedback as to these changes. And that was also happening to like what would happen to a bunch of ruined homes. It's like, hey, you need to rebuild within a certain amount of time, or you need to apply for this thing and that thing. Like, okay, but if the people aren't there, then all of that stuff was kind of just like taken over, and so now like they have no home to return to. I'm laughing with anger. I am laughing with uncomfortable, seething rage. And the big thing that was like happening with the Iraq War was the privatization of the military. So there was a lot of private security firms who were doing things rather than the U.S. military. And then also corporations, like they would not hire local tradespeople to build things or manage things. They would import other labor, which is absolutely a colonial tactic that has been done time and time again. It does many things. If you don't hire the local people, they don't have money, and that leaves them vulnerable and like unable to organize and unable to enact change. And then also, if you import workers, if they don't speak the language, and if they are like in fear of losing their jobs and being deported, that keeps the workers vulnerable and able to be exploited. And then also like the profits from the business do not go to the local economy. They go to whatever, American multinational corporation. So it's a very extractive, very exploitative process. I had a thought. I had lots of thoughts, but I was reading this and then thinking about like what's happening in Ukraine with Russia, and like I'm not gonna get too tinfoil hat. Maybe that's why this is silver, so that this can be my tinfoil hat. But it made me think about like in this day and age, like who the fuck goes to war? Like for what? Like what? Why is that still as kind of a solitary country, a big country, but a solitary country? I guess like the big thing is like, we know that if like Putin pokes the bear too much, as if like invading a country is not enough. But like if like the NATO treaty or agreement or whatever gets triggered, like there's no way that he can win. You know, like if he crosses enough boundaries that like the NATO agreement is triggered, I know very little about this. I'm just like basically like if like this group of political allies if like, you know, the criteria is met for like the rest of the world to go to war against Russia, there's no way Russia could win. So what the fuck are they doing? Well, this book made me think, maybe it's not about the invasion. What else is happening? Which I haven't really had the bandwidth to like look into that, but I think like it will be interesting to try to pay attention. It's going to be hard like when we're in the middle of it, but like in hindsight, you know, 5-10 years from now, to look back on this time and see like what was happening economically, what was happening in terms of like corporate privatization, what was happening in terms of like oil prices, what's happening in terms of, you know, government policy and economic policy, and just see if, I don't know, I'm just like, I'm not saying that the war is a cover for something. I'm just saying, hey, this is a moment of lots of crisis and confusion and a lot of arguments to pass legislation under extreme circumstances. You know, like war and things like that are a good excuse to create a social change that you might not otherwise agree to. So anyway, not to like give you another thing to worry about. My takeaway is just like, pay attention to what else is going on that might not seem related, but I don't know, be vigilant, and don't forget to vote at any chance that you get. Take a lot of notes about this one, but I did really love it. So I then read A Door of Bruises by Sierra Simone. This is the 4th book in the Thorn Chapel erotic novel series. I have to be careful about like not really calling them romances, because by definition the books don't end with a happy ending. Now, the series as a whole does end happy. You know, as happy as what makes sense in this world. I'm so surprised I didn't take more notes of this, because I feel like this is one of my favorite conclusions to a series I think I've ever read. I don't know if it's like one of my favorite books I've ever read, but in terms of the consistency of the world and the characters and the character development and like everything kind of like coming to fruition and then like feeling really satisfied with how everything turned out, like for a conclusion to a series, like this was such a strong final book, and I really loved it. This is definitely like the most paranormal of all of the books. Like all of the other books kind of hint at occult possibilities. Like there's people who have like weird dreams and premonitions, but there's never really anything tangible, and it's not until the 4th book that we actually get a couple of tangible things. There's a lot of weird imagery with like flowers and flower petals, and people like cry flower petals, but like they're also red, so it's almost like they're also crying blood. It's very eerie. and I love it. Oh, and I was correct. It's a little bit of a spoiler, but I feel like this is the kind of thing where, like, someone would want to know this before getting into the series. The incest plotline, yeah, it's not actually. It's not actually. So if that was something you were waiting to hear a conclusion on as to whether or not that incest was, like, actually a real thing, before you, like, jumped in and got invested in the story, it's not. So I guess, like, that's one of the ways in which it's, like, kind of a happy ending. Wait, is it actually not? Or did they leave that unresolved? Oh, fuck, now I can't remember. Fuck. Well, I'm just gonna have to read the series again. I can't say for sure that, like, we're definitely given an out. We're given an out. And if they leave it unresolved, I guess it's kind of, like, up to the reader to be like, which one makes you comfortable. Next, I listened to the audiobook of Deadbeat by Jim Butcher, narrated by James Marsters. This is book number 7 in the Dresden Files series. This one was so much fun. Starting with the, like, book 6 and now in book 7, this is definitely, I think, when the author kind of hits his stride for, like, world building and character development. And I like how, like, so we, building in the series in the background is, like, the war between, like, the White Court wizards and the vampires. Not White Court, White Council versus the vampires. And we haven't really seen that's kind of just been going on in the background, but because Harry Dresden has kind of very much stayed in Chicago and been dealing with his own shit, like, we haven't really seen the front lines of it. And in this book we do kind of see the ripple effects of that war are really starting to trickle down to people on the individual level. And I really liked how that larger background plot is kind of now having its roots in the everyday story of Harry. We also, this book has an amazing, like, rallying cry that it only makes sense in the context, but if I ever hear someone refer it, it'll bring me so much joy. Polka will never die. Like the music, polka will never die. Like, that scene's great. We definitely get to see more of Butters, who is a forensic coroner, who is kind of whenever, like, Harry needs to go investigate a body at the city morgue, like, Butters is the one who's like, I don't want to believe in weird stuff, but I will be honest with you if there's something weird. And I really loved Butters' character development in this. And then at the end, oh my god, the ending is so fun. We get a zombie dinosaur war mount tank. Yeah, so basically, like, somebody has a zombie dinosaur and they ride it into battle. And it's epic, and it's a lot of fun. Okay, finally getting on to some... Man, there was quite a bit of, like, ebooks for a moment there, but now it's, like, all books that I have physical copies of. I'm currently still on a roll of, like, I want to get through the books I own, because, like, I not only have this shelf of physical books to read that I've bought that I haven't read, but I have, like, my series to continue list, and my amnesia reads list, and I'm kind of just, like, aching to, like, really make some hard progress on those. So I'm just gonna ride that wave while it lasts and see what happens. Okay, so next I read and listened to A Test of Wills by Charles Todd. This is the first Inspector Ian Rutledge mystery. Charles Todd is a pseudonym for a mother-daughter... Charles Todd is a pseudonym for a mother-son writing duo, who are based in the U.S., but this takes place in, like, post-World War I Britain. Inspector Ian Rutledge is an inspector who is fresh out of World War One. The war has just ended, and he's definitely suffering from PTSD. They call it shell shock, and this is, of course, before the medical community and like the world at large really understands what's going on with that. Anyway, so yeah, this was an amnesia read. This was something that I knew I had read, and really didn't remember anything about it. As I was reading it, not much was coming back, but I did remember, oh, pay attention to that one character. There's something important with that character. I didn't remember what it was, but I knew, and I was right, that there was something significant with that character. What I thought it was totally wrong from what it was. But it was interesting to be like, oh, I remember something. I'm getting echoes. So this is like, it's definitely too dark to be a cozy mystery, but there's not enough action, I think, to really be a thriller. It's very like, and like the ending is very like a soap opera twist, like very, like, she didn't die, that was my secret twin sister. Like that kind of like, oh, that's who committed the crime. Kind of out of the blue, but its existence does explain everything kind of twists. This was a slow build. I was like not really enthralled by it, but like probably a third of the way through, I was definitely like solidly invested in the story. And I feel like the mental health depiction, I feel like I liked how the mental health was depicted. Like, it's very of the time period. So there's a lot of disparaging comments about people who are experiencing shell shock. But I think like having a main character who is experiencing it himself and is like trying really hard to keep it secret, like adds a really interesting layer. And we do encounter a couple of characters. There's like a nurse in a doctor's office and like one or two other people who like do have a little bit of compassion for it. So I think it's not trying to say something like revolutionary about it, but I think like for the time, it's kind of I liked the depiction. I should say like what the mystery is about. So a man is discovered murdered in a field, and he is like a decorated army captain, and all signs point to his fiance's guardian as being the person who murdered him, because they had an argument because of this and that and the other thing. But the thing is, like, the only witness is a man who is suffering from very terrible shell shock. Like, he's frequently like in the middle of town, like having conversations with invisible people and like directing fake traffic. They comment that, like, clearly he was directing like military vehicles when there was a bunch of like bombing happening, and because of his position he wasn't allowed to leave because it was critical that like these supplies still got through. So that's very much like a moment that he keeps returning to in his actions. So anyway, like it's a whole scandal of if the testimony of this mentally ill man is what condemns the guardian, who is another like decorated war captain, has met the king or the crown prince or whoever, and it would be such a scandal. So Inspector Rutledge is sent to deal with it. He works for Scotland Yard, and he's partly sent there because like one of his superiors doesn't like him. So he's like, okay, either you fail, you either convict this person and nobody will touch you because you convicted somebody who is very well connected, or you can't figure it out and you fail, or the mystery gets murdered. Or the mystery gets murdered. Or the mystery is solved in another way. Like, either way, it's a win-win, right? So that's but the superior of Rutledge doesn't know that he has shell shock, so that's like an added layer of. So anyway, and I did really like that where the title comes from, A Test of Wills. Like, there is like one character in particular. Like, it's very clear that like Rutledge is an outsider and people don't have a hard time trusting him and they don't want to really talk to him and people are all up in each other's business. People are all up in each other's business, but they don't want him to be in their business. So the comment or the phrase "a test of wills" comes from like, he basically corners someone and is like, I know you're not telling me everything. Like, and like an innocent man is going to hang because of it. Like, how are you okay with that? Like, you care for this person. Like, why would you let an innocent person hang? What the fuck? You know, in proper British vernacular, not my crass mouth. And there's a comment of like, it was a test of wills of whether like this person he's talking to would, you know, succumb to his logic or retain their sense of pride and whatever like reason they have for keeping this secret. Yeah, so I think it's well written. It's just, I think I've told myself like, I will, you know, maybe borrow from the library book 2 at some point and give it another shot and see how I feel about it, and just try to like read it when like my brain is in like a different space and just see. Like, I think it's well written. Like, the mystery genre is some place where I haven't read a lot of things, so I don't really know like what about this doesn't really sing to me. Like, do I want it to be darker? Do I want more action? Do I want it to be cozier? Like, I like it. I think it's well done for what it is, but I don't really have the context yet to be like, why don't I love it? Like, what's missing for me? I don't know yet. Anyway, there's that. Next, we have a book that is another contender for a favorite read of the year. This is All's Well by Mona Awad. This was kind of a cover buy because, I mean, first off, theatrical imagery. I work in theater, of course. I'm going to be drawn into this. And then it's all pills. This was fantastic, and the narration was so good. It was so good. I was immediately, this is probably what kicked off me being able to like read all of this stuff, because this was so good and I was just like, I want more storytelling. So this is maybe like a psychological horror adjacent story of a drama teacher, a college drama teacher, who because of an injury, she is experiencing a lot of chronic pain, and she's experiencing a mutiny in her class. She really wants to produce a production of All's Well, and her class kind of mutinies and says, no, we want to produce Macbeth. And you know, she's kind of very much feeling defeated and dealing with her chronic pain stuff. Like, definitely lots and lots of trigger warnings for like depictions of pain medication abuse, like self-medication through alcohol, and then lots of triggering conversations with doctors who don't believe her. There's lots of play on words of the title All's Well, because there's so much about like, well, aren't you well yet? Why aren't you better? Like, there's this expectation of like, I need to try something to make you better, and then it's like, when she doesn't get better, you know, she's made to feel bad because it's like an affront to the egos of the doctors, and then eventually they're like, it's all in your head, and she has to go find someone else to try and take her seriously. So very, very real depictions of that. From my experience, I think they are well done, and the author also draws from some of her own experiences where, you know, she had an injury and dealt with a lot of this stuff. So where the like psychological horror psychedelic aspect of it, it's like psychedelic horror, maybe that's a way to describe it. She encounters these 3 men figures at a bar who are clearly meant to be, you know, parallels to the witches in Macbeth, and they make her a promise. You know, they give her this, you know, they make a deal, and suddenly, like, her pain is lessened, her energy is back, and she regains control of staging a production of All's Well. And I think where we get into, like, kind of horror, like psychedelic horror aspects, is she kind of becomes this larger than life, like, what is a dark and disturbing version of a parody? Whatever that is, like, this larger than life, nightmarish version of a healthy person. And like, part of that deal is, like, the people who doubted her and challenged her the most start to have, like, chronic illness and chronic pain of themselves. So the people who doubted her now go through her experiences, like, kind of as this punishment. And it's fantastic. And it ends happy. And I think I wasn't really expecting that. But I read an interview with the author where she's like, no, like, you know, it's kind of set up to end like a tragedy like Macbeth, but you know what? I wanted better for her. And I think there's also something subversive in that, because there's a lot of depictions, especially in fairy tales, of disabled people. They either get cured and become, you know, their disability is cured, or it's not cured and they continue to suffer because they're bad people. And this kind of ends on a note of, she's not cured. Things are better. The people around her understand her better, have more patience, have more compassion. And she's going to have her bad days, but she's also going to have more good days, which I think is, like, a very, like, for the story it's telling, like, a realistic outlook, but also, like, comparatively really hopeful compared to a lot of depictions we have of disability. And also, like, it's really interesting because, like, it's clearly playing on Shakespeare's All's Well and Macbeth, but I'm also picking up on vibes of, is it Richard III, the one with the king who is usually a hunchback, he's disabled, and he has a lot of rhetoric about, like, you know, because of my deformity, people are already predisposed to hate me, because they don't understand me, they don't understand my pain, and also, like, they fear becoming me, is kind of a common thread. Okay, wow, I was able to say all of that shit off the top of my head. What else? Here's some good wording. We see the surrealist horror that is a person with a healthy body, like, all of that energy, all of their high demands, the high expectations. When you're looking at it from a position of chronic illness or chronic pain, like, that can feel otherworldly and nightmarish. So I think there's a really cool depiction of that in here. Also, here's a great point. We explore the necessary evil of performing your pain, because, like, if people can't see it, then they don't believe you. But if you perform too much, then they either kind of get tired and they stop and they run out of sympathy, or they think you're overdoing it and they start to doubt you, or they just get too uncomfortable and they don't want to deal with it anymore. And then, like, also the expectation to perform being fine, or to perform, like, thankfulness, like, yes, you are helping, you know, yes, doctor, the thing you did made me feel better, when it actually made me feel worse. But I'm tired of telling you that it's making me feel worse because you're being a dick about it. You know, like, all of the performance that is wrapped up in chronic pain and chronic illness, I think, like, it plays with both those themes fantastically. Also, like, the depiction of, like, a college drama setting to a T. Fantastic. Like, I feel like we've all had, like, her in her manic state, we've all had that drama teacher. I feel like my only, like, weird thing that kind of took me out of it is she refers to a maquette for the set model. And I'm like, what the fuck? I have never heard that word. I've never heard that word. Like, we call it a scale model because it's, like, you know, quarter scale or half scale, or a set model, or a mock-up, maybe. But apparently, like, maquette might be, like, a French word. And Mona Awad, I think, is originally from Montreal, so maybe that's where that came from. But I was just like, everything else is, like, feels so accurate. You could have pulled it from my brain except for that word. What the fuck? me nitpicking, not important. It's fantastic. So the next one I finished took me a while. This is The Disordered Cosmos, A Journey into Dark Matter, Space-Time, and Dreams Deferred by Chanda Prescod-Weinstein. And she is one of fewer than 100 Black American women to earn a PhD from a Department of Physics. And this took me a while because this is much more memoir than I was expecting, and also much more like social justice manifesto. Like, I definitely thought this was going to be more like science-based, much more talking about like dark matter and her work as a theoretical particle physicist, which she does do some of that, and especially in the early chapters she really sets it up, but she also like wastes zero time saying like this is a book about like Black Lives Matter, and pulls no punches in terms of like her stances on like social justice and stuff. And I think, especially because I started reading this in March where things were hard, especially, I mean, things were still hard, but like we're not drowning as much as we were, but yeah, there were just moments where I'm like, I need a little bit of a break. But I also think that this is like a really, really powerful voice in talking about science as an academic institution and as like the scientific method, and how a lot of that has been framed, and just like the insidious ways in which like white supremacy is intertwined in the structure of modern science and like Western-based science. I really loved her chapters about like all of like the women in science that we don't see, like how many famous male scientists only had the freedom to do the work they did because of the women who took care of their homes and raised their children and did everything that wasn't science, and how like disregarded all of that women's work is. And then also like, you know, all of the typists and the secretaries and the researchers and like all of the women whose work has been stolen and, you know, being accredited to men, just like all of these women who like have contributed to these great, like because of the invisible work they do, have contributed to these amazing scientific discoveries, and just like really reshaping the way we look at who is part of the team that discovers something or invents something. And then she has a chapter about what does she call that chapter? She's got a chapter, Rape is Part of This Scientific Story. And like she talks about in that chapter how like she almost didn't want to include this aspect. She didn't really want to talk about sexual assault because she knew that then it would be the point that everybody would talk about. Which then like I feel weird being like that was one of the parts of this book that like really stood out to me. But I think it also speaks to like the power in her telling that story. I think like because of where my brain was when I read it, like I haven't really retained a lot of it, but it's kind of like her as a sexual assault survivor, like she has to live with that. Like that is a thing that she carries, that the men around her for the most part like don't also carry, and that influences her ability to do her work. Like if you turn it into a physical thing that someone carries, that is a thing that the women in science have to carry that most of their colleagues don't have to, and it needs to be talked about. Anyway, like no, I think this is excellent. I think it was just so different from what I was expecting, and it was a lot heavier than I was expecting, but I think like it is also really makes the case of like, and why were you expecting a story about science to not talk about Indigenous rights and sexual assault and racist language, and like, because hey, that's part of it. Surprise, surprise, that's part of it, and we need to talk about it. Okay, then I picked up the audiobook for Anansi Boys by Neil Gaiman. This was another amnesia read. In rereading this or re-listening to it, I didn't remember anything about it. And I feel like, did I find something in here? I feel like I found a receipt or something in here that showed, when I bought it, and I think I bought it, like, my senior year of college. I'm like, oh yeah, I was so burnt out and so exhausted. No wonder I didn't remember a single thing about it. I also didn't remember that this is a companion novel to American Gods. Like, it's definitely like its own standalone story, but I guess like they exist canonically in the same universe. I had a question that got answered when I read another review that pointed out that the author Nalo Hopkinson was a consultant on the Caribbean accent dialogue in here, and actually Neil Gaiman acknowledges that in his acknowledgments. And I'm like, fuck yeah, like, it definitely shows when you have, like, an own voices person, helping you to create a cultural world that is very different from your own. And especially, like, in the narration, like, I could definitely see the fruition of that work. In the very beginning, it was reminding me of the book Holes by Louis Sachar. You'd think I would know how to pronounce the author's name, seeing as I've had to pronounce it in a wrap-up before. But it reminded me of, like, the writing style of that book in terms of, it's a little almost like on the edge of nonsensical, on the edge of whimsical, with like a very annoyed character where like some not great things are happening to them, but there's something like, it's like our lead character, Fat Charlie, who's not fat, and there's a whole story about that, but he's talking about like how the worst thing about his dad is he's so embarrassing, and like going through all of the ways, and like the way that which Fat Charlie kind of like is so focused on the embarrassment that he doesn't notice the like odd and paranormal aspect of his father. It was interesting. There was something about the whimsy of it that was really reminding me of the storytelling aspect of Holes. Like, it's almost like, it's like you're telling a folktale, which is really fitting because we're talking about Anansi, the story, the spider who spun all the stories of the world. But yeah, like, overall, I enjoyed it. I didn't, I agree with, like, a review I saw where I didn't really love the plot line that is the seduction of the fiance of Fat Charlie by another character. Especially because, like, she's made such a point about, like, being a virgin and waiting until marriage, and then like that goes out the window when she meets this other character, and like the way it's resolved at the end like kind of I think lessens the blow a little bit, but I do feel like a little weird about, I guess, like using woman's purity as a plot point. I just kind of feel weird about it. It's like it doesn't really detract from my overall enjoyment of the book. But yeah, it was fun. It was fun. And I'm hopefully will remember more of the story and how I felt about it going forward. Okay, next I picked up Love Stargirl by Jerry Spinelli, which is the sequel to the beloved Stargirl, which is one of my favorite childhood books ever. And in opening this, I found what I had previously used as a bookmark. And that explained everything about why I remembered absolutely nothing about this. The bookmark was an expired college ID from my ex-boyfriend. And the ending of that relationship was not good. So kind of similar to the timing in which I read Anansi Boys, I'm like, oh, no wonder I didn't remember anything because my mental health was not good when I read this. Yeah, it's super interesting, like reading these things where I remember nothing versus like Test of Wills, and then like another book in here where in reading them, like some things were actually able to come back to me. So that contrast has been interesting. So anyway, this takes place a few months after the end of Stargirl, and takes place in the form of letters that Stargirl is writing and like never sending to Leo Borlock. I didn't really love that so much of the story is focused around Stargirl getting over her first love of Leo Borlock and then kind of getting sort of falling in love, sort of just like being interested in like this other boy. Like so much of like everything she's going through is around these boys and like the way that how much like it's not even their presence, it's just like how much the idea of them is like influencing her emotions. I didn't love that for her. Like this was a very charming story. She makes friends with a 4-year-old child named Wiltsie, who's a 5-year-old human being, and she's adorable. And yeah, so like Stargirl's like character arc and the way that it's mostly focused around boys I didn't love, but it does still have these very charming moments. Like there's a moment where she has gotten Wiltsie up very early to watch the sunrise on the longest day of the year, and she turns around and watches a 5-year-old see the sunrise for the first time in her life. And like that's one of like these charming, larger than life, learn to love life, love the minutia of life aspects of Stargirl that I really loved in like the first book. So it was nice to like see a few of those elements still in this story. It's a nice continuation, but I feel like because we're in Stargirl's head and I guess like the point of this is like to be in Stargirl's head and to see her insecurities. She's like 15, 16, and like so we're seeing her insecurities and we're seeing her emotional development and stuff, but I felt like so much of what charmed me about Stargirl in the first novel was we didn't see how much things got to her. And that's kind of like the conflict of the book Stargirl, in that when she tries to change and become more normal and the way your heart breaks for her, that, you know, she's finally succumbing to social pressure, and then the way that like she eventually says like, no, actually this is worse. I'd rather be an outcast and be myself. That and the way we see that from the outside, it might just be a lot of nostalgia, but like I think I appreciated her arc better when I didn't know the minutia of everything she was thinking, and I just saw her commitment, her outward commitment to authenticity. Anyway, so I'm glad to have reread this in a different time and to have some better memories of this. Yeah, okay. So the next two books that I read and listened to back to back, we've got, which one is book 2? Behemoth is book 2 by Scott Westerfield, and then book 3, Goliath. In my book haul, I mentioned that this cover annoys me because this character, Darren, is a girl in disguise as a boy. And they talk about it several times that she is taller than Alec. And that's part of what like helps her keep her disguise, is that for a girl, she's tall. So I don't know why they felt the need to belittle her character on the cover. Small rant aside. Anyway, so these are steampunk-ish alternate history novels that take place during the very beginning of World War I. And we have the Clankers, which is like Germany and the East, and they are all about like engines. They have Zeppelins and like clanker walker, they're referred to as clankers, and they're all about machines, and they're all like oil driven by petrol. And then the Darwinists are, England and then most of Western Europe. And they have biologically engineered creatures in place of many machines. So instead of zeppelins, they have these flying leviathans. Submarines with torpedoes, they have engineered these krakens, etc. So it's not just like a clash of like political power, but it's also a clash of ideas about technology. I made a comment of like, I like how our lead characters, they're like age like 15, 16. I like how they're clever, but not at the expense of the adults being fools. And I feel like sometimes you see that. These are like middle grade novels. Sometimes you see, you're told that our main young characters are very clever and are able to like outsmart the adults. But it's like, okay, but they outsmart the adults because they're stupid. But I feel like, no, these young people are legitimately like clever and putting things together and coming up with good ideas. But the adults around them are for the most part also quite competent. So that was just like a detail of the characters that I liked. Let's see, I like the gradual buildup of political war context. We get a little bit of like military strategy. Like we talk about like the strategic value of the location of Istanbul, like where it is in terms of, it's like the gateway between East and West. It's, where the Mediterranean connects to the Black Sea and things like that. Let's see, it avoids some common historical fiction cultural pitfalls, such as we do not get the G-word slur for traveler people, and we don't even call them Roma. They're called Romanians and Armenians, and we talk. You might recognize like what cultural aspects they're supposed to be based on like their descriptions of their dress and their language, but they kind of avoid the worst of the stereotypes. So that was something I appreciated. In Goliath, there's some interesting insinuations about American politics. Oh, here we go. The United States was another half Darwinist, half clanker country, but unlike Japan, the technologies weren't happily combined there. The two halves of America had been fighting a vicious civil war when old Darwin had announced his discoveries. So the South had adopted Darwinist agricultural techniques, while the industrial North had stayed loyal to the machine. Even 50 years later, the nation remained split in two, which is interesting in the context of the world where it's like, okay, but the North, in being loyal to the machine, is now aligned with Germany in World War I, which is not quite the same as Germany in World War II, but there's like some interesting insinuations about... I don't know, I thought there were some interesting insinuations in there. Oh, and then we also like go into Mexico, and I had no idea that the Mexican Revolution was happening at the same time as the beginning of World War I. I fucking love that. I want more of that. I wish more like of the history we were taught in schools was not just focused on like a significant event, but like gave you the cultural context of like what was going on in the rest of the world. Anyway, so yeah, it was super interesting that this author chose to remind us that World War I was not the sum total of everything that was happening in the world at that time. So, yes. And I also really appreciate that the author at the end kind of does a brief overview of like what is drawn from real events and what was, completely fabricated on his side. I think I had commented that like I think this series would be interesting if you had a middle school aged kid who was learning about like World War I, and then like to kind of use like this fictional story to give them some kind of like anchor points for like which countries were on which side, what were their political reasons for such and such alliance, etc. And giving them like this. I mean, it kind of goes off the rails in some ways, but giving them, like, I know I would have really benefited from having, like, a story narrative to anchor names, dates, and places. Anyway, yeah, I fucking really enjoyed this series. It's got some, the physical copies have some really great illustrations going on in there. Let's see, this is, who is this? This is Alec, like, escaping through a screen of a mechanical shadow puppet. Yeah. And good for me, I finished a series on my series to finish list. Hooray. These books are also fucking heavy. Okay, so the next book I mostly listened to was The Book Thief by Marco Zusak. This was very different than I was expecting. So a lot of the big selling point about, so this is a book that takes place in Germany during World War II, and it follows a young girl who befriends a Jewish man who the family she's staying with ends up hiding this Jewish man during World War II in Germany. It's a dark book. And like a big selling point is that it's narrated by Death, but Death is not really a character. I would compare it to, it's kind of like the second person narration in the 5th season, specifically the first book before you know who the narrator is. You know, Death occasionally comes in. Death is kind of like this occasional omnipotent narrator who gives you some hints about the future. Like, for example, he's talking about this character and then a small announcement about Rudy Steiner. He didn't deserve to die the way he did. And then it just kind of goes on with the story. So so, you know, if you're like, oh my god, it's narrated by Death, I'm like, Death is not necessarily a character so much as like a narrative device. But anyway, this was beautifully written. Definitely doesn't talk down. This is definitely like a young adult novel that could very easily be read by an adult, and like the writing is like lush and atmospheric and haunting, and is like the writing style is like, I feel like very unlike any like young adult novel I think, I don't know about ever read, but like it's definitely, it stands out. And it's got like some multimedia aspects to sort of like you'll get like newspaper headlines. There's a part where like the Jewish man is like making drawings and writing a story, and it's not really a spoiler, but I think it's interesting when he's writing this like story as a gift to our young girl. The what he uses to write it on, I feel like the symbolism of that is very cool and kind of disturbing, but mostly I'm like, fuck yeah. This is definitely like a book that is a love letter to books, that is a love letter to the subversiveness of fiction, the subversiveness of creativity, and like the way, like I love that this is kind of shows the way that like resistance and activism doesn't always have to be loud. It can literally be like just like choosing not to be cruel in a world that wants you to be cruel. I really love this, and the narration is very good too. Yeah, this was, I absolutely see the hype. Yeah, if this has kind of been on your radar, I highly recommend it. It's not for a book about World War II and the horrors that it contained, especially for its Jewish population. Given that that's the subject matter, it's not horrifically dark, but it's definitely not Stargirl, lighthearted, joyous, you know? It doesn't necessarily have humor, but it has, like, an example of this is the way that like the death narration will kind of like give you a lot of foreshadowing at when unpleasant things are going to happen, so that they're not so shocking when they happen. I feel like that's kind of an example of one of the ways like it avoids being too dark, in that the book is very careful with the emotions of its reader. You know, it definitely like prepares you for the dark moments and gives you, and definitely finds moments for you to feel joy, feel relief, feel a moment of levity, feel a moment of safety. Yeah, I think it's a wonderfully crafted book. And I'm kind of sad that this is a book I got from a free library, because I will have to be returning it to the free library. But I'm also glad that like that means that somebody else will have the opportunity to pick it up and experience it, which I love that. I love that. I'll take joy in that. So next is one of my most anticipated books for the year. This is definitely going to be a contender for Best Nonfiction of the Year. This is Fearlessly Different, An Autistic Actor's Journey to Broadway's Biggest Stage by Mickey Rowe. Mickey Rowe is a local Seattle actor with autism. He is the first known actor with autism to play the lead role of Christopher in productions of Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, which is about an autistic character, but the story is not written by an autistic person. Disclaimer, I personally know Mickey, like we're not close, but we kind of came up through the Seattle youth drama scene around the same time. You know, if we're in the same room, like we definitely would say, hi, how you been? You know, we run in similar circles, so like disclaimer that I do like know him personally and of course like wish him success, but also I think as much as I can try to be objective, like this is an excellent memoir. So he definitely chronicles his life as an autistic kid with a family that didn't really understand, like his parents knew he was autistic, but then like they wouldn't tell his teachers, and you know the ableism that he experienced as a child, and like how he discovered his love of drama, and the fact that like he discovered drama at the same theater that is the spark of my own career in theater. Like my heart was singing along at that moment. Like his experience was like he was latching on to different things, and like a lot of his experience was different from mine, but like, oh, what a magical place that that Seattle Children's Theater has inspired such joy, and has been such a beacon of joy for the kids who come see shows there. So that was cool. Yeah, and he kind of like found that like performing was like his best method for making a living and being his authentic self. And then when he heard about The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime being a stage production, he made it his life's goal to be cast in that role, because that role should be played by an autistic actor. And he kind of like, yes, this is a memoir, but he also talks a lot about like, you know, statistics where it's like, you know, 90% of college graduates with autism, I don't know if it's actually 90%, but it's a very high number. Like 90% of people with autism with a college degree are unemployed. And, you know, like the unfairness of disability treatment in this country, like there's no federal minimum wage for somebody with a disability. That inspires so much rage. So we talked about like a lot of the injustices, a lot of the obstacles, and he also talks about like, hey, like here's the things I would have needed, here's the accommodations I needed. You know, when I was like auditioning for something, I just needed things in a larger font. And that was denied. Again, irrational rage. But like he gives so many examples of like, this is like, here is the challenge and here is the solution. And throughout this he also like, and I think with that, like he spells out like how attainable it is to make our society more accessible to people with disabilities, people with, you know, developmental disabilities or physical disabilities or chronic illness, etc. And he really, like, was it in my like Goodreads review, I say he's He's a powerhouse of joy and justice. He really keeps like an upbeat, positive focus, while also really being frank about the ableism that is still rampant in our country. And he keeps that for most of the book. He kind of loses it a little bit with reason in like the end of chapter 12, when he's talking about the onset of the COVID-19 lockdown, and then like the hospitals being overwhelmed, and particularly when he was talking about how when the medical system had to triage like who was and wasn't deserving of care, and the way the ableist practices were implemented, like it wasn't like really anything new. Like these were all stories that I had followed along with in the news, but it was still just, again, rage-inducing and exhausting, and just so frustrating to see anyone with a disability was just already labeled as discardable. And, you know, I do absolutely have empathy. Like, I cannot imagine, like, being a medical professional in that situation, being like, we literally just do not have enough beds. We don't have enough equipment. Like, we have to have a hierarchy. Like, I have empathy, like, for that need, but the fact that, like, that hierarchy was created with disabled people at the bottom, and that was created without any disabled people in the room making that decision, like, that's of course going to lead to a lot of misconceptions about who does and doesn't have a good chance of recovering. Like, you know, like he talks about like there are like other methods available that were not considered. Anyway, like I kind of harp on like that conversation because like I definitely found like that one particularly triggering in terms of like how horrific our medical system can be towards people with disabilities. So I just want to like give that. Like, there's a lot, I mean, of course, talking about someone facing discrimination, there's going to be lots of trigger warnings for that one, but, like, that is one, like, I definitely need to point out that, like, skip to, like, the last page of chapter 12 if you're finding that one kind of hard. Like, I mean, I shouldn't say, like, just skip it. I should say, if you are somebody who has a disability or experiences chronic pain, and you are already intimate with that kind of discrimination, and you don't want to have to relive it while reading it, skip to the last page and a half. But I do think, like, if you are neuronormative, and if you are an overall healthy person who doesn't experience a lot of that discrimination, like, it's a really essential conversation to have to confront. So, I mean, I am not the best person to give or not give, like, permission, but I don't know. I think I've, as usual, I'm tripping over my words, but I think I've made my point somewhere in there. Anyway, yeah, I think this is fucking fantastic. I think I would, it's definitely kind of put me in mind of the book The Reason I Jump, which I actually picked up that book on Mickey Rowe's recommendation. And that one is at the time of that it was written by a autistic boy in Japan who was 13, just kind of describing his experience of being a nonverbal autistic, and just kind of like answering some questions and assumptions. And I feel like if you read that and you want more, this is a more fleshed out version of that kind of thing, because now Mickey Rowe, he's an adult, he's a parent with custody of his 2 biological children, and who is also now married to another woman. He's an autistic person who has had career success. So if you want the perspective of someone who just like has a more life experience to draw on and make conclusions on, and also someone who can like reflect on the particularities of the society he lives in. So like as someone who is reflecting on the Americans with Disabilities Act and like our current medical care system, I think this definitely builds on the groundwork that was laid by the books like The Reason I Jump. Anyway, fucking excellent. Congratulations, Mickey. I wish you so much success. And I hope to be able to see you on stage in the near future. Next I picked up Darling Beast by, what's her name? Darling Beast by Elizabeth Hoyt. This is book number 7. This is book number 7 in the Maiden Lane historical romance series. So this one, let's see, it follows the character of Apollo that we met in the last book, and then the actress who plays, I forget her name, but we've seen this actress on stage when other characters have gone to see a show. So the romance is between those two characters. So this one, it starts off with like, it's not great, but slightly self-aware disabled representation. So the character of Apollo experienced some physical and emotional trauma in the last book, and that has rendered him unable to speak. His vocal cords were damaged, but there's also like a psychological block there. And I think it's kind of trying to give like some Beauty and the Beast plot vibes, but there's a lot of imagery about him being like monstrous and him possibly like being stupid because of his inability to speak. He's also like a physically large guy. So there's just a lot of, the fear of a disabled person, like the fear and judgment that comes from, how people view a disabled person. And the story still ends with the disability being removed, like both in our main story and then like also interspersed in the chapters. There will be like this fairy tale fable that kind of parallels the story, and that one kind of follows the story of the Minotaur in the maze. And at the end of the story, the Minotaur gets turned back into a beautiful man. So it's a very, not uniquely heinous, but similar themes of disability in literature and folklore, of disability being a monstrous, unlikable thing, and then a happy ending is when the disability is removed. Like, there is a moment where our heroine kind of catches herself about, like, how she unfairly judged this man before he regained his ability to speak. So that's where I say like there's a little bit of like self-awareness in there, but I don't think it's really strong enough to call that good representation. But there is another recurring character in the series she goes blind over the course of the series, and by this book she is fully blind, and I think like the depiction of her character and her disability is pretty good. So just want to throw that out there. Note about this book, we don't really get any steamy scenes until past the 50% mark, just if that's relevant to your expectations of this book. We do still have some interesting web of conspiracies in the larger plot, but we don't have so much of the big bad underworld boss that we have recurring plot elements of in previous books. So like this book definitely feels quite a bit more standalone in terms of the world than some of the other books in the series. So, I mean, overall, I enjoyed it, and I'm interested in continuing with the series, but it's not the strongest in the series by far, in my opinion. Okay, 2 more. Oh my god, 2 more. We're almost there. Okay, then I read and listened to A Brief History of Time, From the Big Bang to Black Holes by Stephen W. Hawking, with an introduction by Carl Sagan. This is kind of definitely like an intro to science, sort of intro to science book. I definitely see Stephen Hawking's talents as a teacher. He clearly has like earned his professor status, not just from being someone who like is at the forefront of his field of theoretical physics. Is that right? Theoretical physics? Maybe it's more astrophysics. But it's like, yeah, I can definitely see him being somebody who teaches classes and does lectures and really like walks students through the whole learning about all of this kind of stuff. Anyway, I feel like this is a lot of the same information as I have gotten in reading books like Cosmos, also building on information from like The Universe by Isaac Asimov, but I think time period wise this kind of comes after Cosmos but before the astrophysics books of like Neil deGrasse Tyson. So this is like very much in the early days of particle physics and theoretical physics. So I think also timeline, this comes before the work that is discussed in Disordered Cosmos. Like her stuff is like very theoretical. Like almost all of her stuff is math based. Like the work she does, like there's really very little work that she can do that requires her to actually like look at a telescope. A lot of her stuff is very much like radio waves and like gamma radiation and like things like that. But so in terms of timeline of like where the technology has progressed, like that's kind of where this sits. He does talk a lot more about, again, like the concept of time, which I think this would pair really well with The Order of Time by Carlo Rovelli. I feel like I would have benefited from maybe like reading this one before reading that one, but I think working together, I think it does kind of give a good picture of like how much our perception of time is very influenced by like humans making time be something that's useful to us, as opposed to how the concept of time actually exists in the realm of physics. And also like talking about black holes. He talks about some interesting stuff. I think what really stands out to me in this book is he really engages with Christian theology in a way that's like very gentle and encompassing. Like he doesn't like treat creationist biblical teachings with fear or disdain. He kind of very much like is like, okay, assuming God is real, here is how the Christian God would fit into the knowledge that we have discovered about our universe. You know, God does not play dice. Like our world is built with consistent rules, consistent patterns, and that we don't believe that to be an accident. So yeah, I found his rhetoric around that is interesting, and also like how much that conversation revolves around the concept of the Big Bang. Like I just opened to one of my tabs. Many people do not like the idea that time has a beginning, probably because it smacks of divine intervention. But yeah, I find it interesting. I have another book by Stephen Hawking. I have The Universe in a Nutshell. And this, having read this one kind of makes me excited to get into that one, because that one has a lot more diagrams. And I find that I'm at the point where I need more diagrams. I need to like see more examples. I need to like see what hear what the experiments are. Like just telling me that like there was the Big Bang and we started off with helium and then like this and this happened. I'm like, okay, I get that. Like what I need, like there's the stuff I understand and there's the stuff that like I know the words, but I really wouldn't be able to explain them, and I'm trying to like fill in that middling to advanced stuff without actually having to like take an astrophysics class and be graded on that, because I don't want that much pressure. All right, then the last book I read / listened to was A Wind in the Door, a companion to A Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine L'Engle. This is book 2 in the time quintet that starts with A Wrinkle in Time. So this takes place like 2 years later. Charles Wallace is now 6 and Meg she must be 15. And Charles Wallace gets sick. So, and then there is something kind of paranormal, metaphysical about his sickness. So Meg goes on a journey into his mitochondria to help him. Oh my god, I love this series because again, like it really doesn't talk down to its youth audience, but it tackles big themes like you know, evil in the universe, and like the way entropy in the universe can be like the advent of like violence and evil and despair in the universe. And there's a whole thing in here where it's like, well, you have to like love someone in order to save them, and she's like, but I don't like this person, how can I love this person when I actually despise them? And really kind of going through like the different facets of love. And it's like, you know, recognizing that someone is who they are because of their imperfections, and like how that can be interpreted as love as opposed to hate and fear and the things that are very societally destructive. And like there's a way to engage with the things you don't like in a way that's not destructive. Like, anyway, big themes, and I just really love how this series kind of tackles them, and the ways in which like sometimes her series are like kind of have like a premonition aspect to it. So there's a scene where Meg is overhearing a conversation with her parents in the past, and her mother is saying, it isn't just in distant galaxies that strange and reasonable things are happening. Unreason has crept up on us so insidiously that we've hardly been aware of it. But think of things going on in our own country which you wouldn't have believed possible only a few years ago. When was this written? Published 1974. 1973, 74. And like almost 50 years later, the threat of unreason creeping into our world. Anyway, yeah, I'm having a great time. I also want to like highlight, so the illustrator for this edition is Peter Siss, and I don't really know many like book cover illustrators by name, but this is one that like has stuck out to me. I have his the Windsinger trilogy that he did covers for, and I really like his illustration style because there's something about it that is like whimsical and cute, but also like unsettling, that I feel suits the books very well. So he has a whole series, I think up through book 4. It's so interesting because like I will look at like previous editions of the Time series, and some of them will say like the Time trilogy, and like and some of them will say the quartet, and now it's like, well, it's officially now the quintet. There's 5 books in this series, but it's interesting like depending on when each book, this edition was published, like how many books were available at the time. Anyway, I had a good time with this. And I will talk about book 3, A Swiftly Tilting Planet, when I do my wrap up for May. Okay, there we go. That's the video. I'm tired. What's my outro? I hope you have a good rest of your day. I encourage you to go out into the world and be curious. I will have my social media and other places where you can find me in the description box below. And yeah, I will catch you folks in my next video. Bye!